music and has a chapter in the Cambridge Companion to Metal Music on Sparta. Not the companion is not on Sparta, his chapter is on Sparta. So, welcome, Jeremy. And his paper is entitled From Argentoratum to Argentina, heavy metal, decolonialism, and the world's first concept album on the Emperor Julian.
Well, thank you, Heidi, and glad to see you all here early this morning. I think I'm going to give you a bit of a wake up here.
Uh-oh.
Worship of the Gods es nuestro segundo álbum de estudio. Contiene 13 tracks basados en la vida del emperador Juliano, conocido por intentar restaurar el paganismo en el Imperio Romano. El proceso compositivo de este álbum duró un poco más de 2 años y utilizamos todo ese tiempo para lograr lo mejor de cada composición, lo mejor de cada canción y de algún modo inconsciente, sin cerrarlo entre nosotros, ¿no? Decidimos no ponernos una fecha límite para lanzar este álbum hasta que sea perfecto. Este disco tiene absolutamente todo de nosotros, nuestro arte, nuestro tiempo, todo nuestro dinero, vive por sí mismo y es muy poderoso, tanto a nivel conceptual como a nivel musical.
So, part of the reason I played that was to give you an idea a little bit of what heavy metal sounds like. I don't have time to, for those who are not as familiar with the genre, to go into the definitions or the history of heavy metal. So just bear with me that this is one of the most popular genres of music in the world. And part of what I do is, and that's a fact. And part of what I do is I have, for the past several years, looked at the fact that there are thousands of songs by hundreds of bands all over the world in dozens of countries that take a profound interest in the history, mythology, and literature of what I would say premodernity and pre-colonial worlds, especially what we might call more classical or ancient Mediterranean cultures, Greece, Rome, Egypt, Mesopotamia, etc. These include concept albums on various topics, like I'll talk about today. In the past decade or so, this has also drawn the attention of classicists such as myself and others who are looking at this as a very vibrant and interesting and diverse form of classical reception. And that's basically what I'm drawing to your attention today. And the kind of scholarly foundations that classicists such as myself are working on here is the fact that for the past couple decades, there has been a growing and interdisciplinary field of what we call metal music studies. We bring together musicians, musicologists, sociologists, as well as historians and literature people, biblical studies people, and classicists such as myself, in order to look at how this genre of music, its history and its functions and its cultural impact. We have journals, we have conferences, we have, of course, conferences and even university courses, and a growing body of scholarship. So I'm not going into completely new territory here in terms of the scholarly methodologies for exploring this album we're going to talk about today. In fact, if you go to some of the earliest scholarship on metal music studies, which is Weinstein's monograph, Heavy Metal, the Music and Its Culture, published in 1991, she, in fact, on some of the very first pages, looks at classical mythology and religion as a a frame of reference to understanding some of the key elements of the heavy metal ethos, and that is sort of this ditheism, this binary opposition of Dionysus and chaos. Chaos representing the opposition to order, the opposition to the status quo, to systems of conformity and control, economic, religion, political, etc. And then the flip side of that is the Dionysian, the positive celebration of life and instinct, and also the providing a context in which transgression, right, crossing boundaries, as well as that sort of oppositional feelings can be validated. Okay? And this explains a lot why heavy metal is interested in darker topics of monsters, the underworld, hell, confronting kind of the elements of society that are less tasteful. Okay? And so classicists before me, such as Osman Nurhan at the University of Mexico, have done some of the earliest scholarship on metals appropriation of Greco-Roman antiquity. And what Osman would say is that when looking at specifically Greece and Rome, we see lots of military themes, military history, political history, and specifically we see a fascination with characters that symbolize aggression, power, struggle, masculinity, and what inhabiting this thought world of Greece and Rome does for heavy metal bands is it provides an escape as well as a response to feelings of social alienation and disempowerment by this attraction to these powerful kind of warrior figures in these popular conceptions of classical antiquity. Okay? And we see this in scholarship in other languages as well. So for instance, my colleague, Elena Gonzalez-Patricio, would say, looking at figures like Julius Caesar, Alexander, the Spartans in metal, these are locuses of masculinity, escapism, empowerment, but also of heritage and nationalism, which can cut in various political directions. But ultimately, we have a very strong sense of romanticism for a pre-modern past that has been forgotten and overridden by modern systems of capitalism, neoliberalism, globalism, and so we see a lot of influence of Enlightenment as well as Romantic literature and ideas kind of behind a lot of this genre of music, especially its reception of antiquity. And one thing I've done is kind of look at how Roman emperors themselves factored into this phenomenon. What's so metal about Roman emperors? And I explored this topic in an article that I wrote for Relations Quarterly last year that I was invited to write. And the reason they invited me to write this article was because instead of doing the work I was supposed to be doing, I decided to run a quantitative analysis of the mentions of Roman emperors in metal music in lyrics. And I found this is what it produced. And as you can see here, some are more metal than others, though it really comes down to more well-known than others, but also known for things that would resonate with the heavy metal ethos of transgression, of madness, of power, and certainly opposition to hegemonic systems of conformity and control, especially Christianity, since heavy metal is traditionally from majority Christian countries, and so Christianity, at least symbolically, becomes this antithesis to the heavy metal ethos. And you can see where we're starting to get toward Julian here. So just a few of the things that account for why Roman emperors in heavy metal seem to be so popular. These are figures, especially if you can put yourself in their shoes, they are empowering. Right? They are aggressive. They're often military figures, or they commit acts of violence. Right? Some of them, such as Caligula and Nero, they are associated with the irrational, the Dionysian, and that is also accounts for Roman emperors have ultimate freedom, at least in the conception of these bands. They are free to explore kind of the extremes of human nature and pleasure, right? And of course, with figures like Caligula, Nero, Decius, Diocletian, and Julian, of course, and others, okay, we see this association of Roman emperors with oppositional sentiments towards Christianity, right? And also for especially bands from Mediterranean, such as Greece and Italy, but also elsewhere, countries that where people have a claim to the so-called classical heritage, we see that in appealing to the pre-modern, pre-Christian past, that these figures are a locus of identity and authenticity that they feel that was overwritten by more modern developments, right? And then finally, another thing that accounts for a lot of this is simply the fame and notoriety of these emperors, okay? In popular culture, through Hollywood and other media, okay, figures like Caligula and Nero, okay, tend to be the most well-known stereotypical Roman emperors, whereas some of these others, okay, that are not as well-known, well, that's often the result of these artists actually taking a hobby and interest in Roman history and reading some of the sources available, okay? And if you're wondering about Constantine here, okay, and I have an article on this, Constantine is actually seen as the antithesis to the metal ethos. Okay, a lot of songs about Constantine show how he sees him as a traitor to everything that is Roman by adopting Christianity and forgetting the old ways. Okay, that at least in the minds of these bands, made Rome great and made Rome strong, right? So what about Julian here? Okay. All right, well, as your Roman emperor, he's necessarily very powerful, okay? And he's certainly a military emperor, okay, with campaigns, again, in Gaul as well as in Persia, okay? And of course, he has the reputation and sources of also being very much involved with the army and not just sitting back while the men fight for him, right? Madness, that is a very fraught scholarly question, whether Julian was entirely in his right mind with everything he was doing. I'm not going to get into that at all right now, okay? But certainly, as we'll see in this album, we see kind of an element of bloodlust, imputed upon him that we don't really see in most other sources except perhaps Vidal, right? Freedom, okay, certainly Roman emperor has the power and freedom to do as they wish, at least in the popular conception. But of course, what we'll see with this album is also the idea of freedom of religion is very much a value that the band has that they see in Julian, which is a very enlightenment reading of Julian. Transgression and of course anti-Christianity is very much in the definition of Julian as apostate, right? As the transgressor, right? The opposer to what was becoming a dominant force. And then, as we talked about with Percival, they're claiming the classical heritage as descended from Italian immigrants in Argentina, as well as seeing the heritage of the Roman Empire in decolonial Americas. As for fame and notoriety, this is one of these figures where he's not a household name in popular culture, not yet. And so, it actually requires the band to take an active interest in pursuing this topic, and I'll talk about the sources that they cover. Okay. So far there's 8 songs that I found that are specifically about Julian, but Percival's Worship of God is the only concept album, entire album of songs devoted to him. And it's also the only band that is not from Europe or not from places like Italy and Greece that you would expect to take an interest in this topic. Okay. So methodologically, I benefit from what's called the Encyclopedia Italian, or the Metal Archives. You can tell they didn't consult a classicist to name that. And basically, it's an online, open access, open source database of basically lyrics and all a bunch of information of every metal band that has recorded material. So it's been very helpful to research. You can see that they're from Argentina, formed in Buenos Aires in 2004. Okay. And you can use this database to kind of look at the spread of metal as a global phenomenon, and its growing presence, especially in many countries in Latin, in Central and South America, including Argentina. And you can see there that it's on par. These countries are on par with several countries in Europe, even in terms of how popular metal music is. I'm also benefiting from scholarship on heavy metal music in Latin America and specifically Argentina, and how it operates as a cultural force there. In particular, one of the most prevalent kind of trends in Latin American metal music is decolonialism, sympathy with the pre-colonial cultures, and trying to kind of reclaim an identity that is pre-Christian, as well as anti-globalist, anti-capitalist, anti-neoliberal, right, and certainly more environmentally sensitive. So when we talk about Tercival as part of Argentinian metal music, we can get the sense that they, what you might call it, metal pesado argento, okay, so literally silver, right, silver heavy metal, right, from the name. And you can see that due to the history of Argentina, the late 70s, early 80s, coming out of the military dictatorship, we see that this music appealed to people of working class origins, as well as we see an influence and a synthesis with traditional Argentine music, Congo folklore, Andean folk music, right? And again, this sort of decolonial tendency to sympathize and identify with indigenous populations, and then seeing any elements that can be identified with colonialism, such as Roman Catholicism, right, as at least a symbolic kind of almost scapegoat in some situations, right? And the majority of these bands do tend to have an inward focus, lyrics mostly in Veoplatense Spanish, rather than the lingua franca of metal, which is English, which is with its more international focus. So I also interviewed the heart and soul of the band, which is Leandro Gervino, and what I found is that as a part of this movement of Argentine metal is they weren't the only band to take an interest in themes of paganism and early and ancient European history. There was a number of bands taking interest in that. As I said, they're also the product of a mestizo. There are mestizos, right, of both Italian immigrants as well as the native population in Argentina, incorporating that kind of folk music, but also Italian folk music as well, which are similar. And their general lyrical output seems to have a sense of what they want to call pagan brotherhood, in other words, solidarity and identification with pagans worldwide, not as a monolith, but as a diverse group that are united by a common cause of opposition to the more hegemonic forms of religion, right? And also, they have an interest particularly in solar worship as a very common element in a lot of pagan religions, and of course, the religion of Julian, as we'll see. They also write their religion in English, rather than in Spanish, so they do have a more international focus, but as I found with them, they do, and they did relocate to Sweden in 2018, they do still maintain their roots in Argentina, so one of the songs in their more recent albums, have trilingual lyrics like this, right? So I'm going to just skip ahead since that took way more time than I realized. But these are the three albums I have, so I'm going to focus on Worship of the Gods. I'm not going to get into some of the rationale for this album. But you can see here that a heavy metal album is not just lyrics, it's not just music, but it's also the artwork, which tells you a lot. So here they represent Julian, and they call the album Worship of the Gods, which is actually a quote from Ammianus Marcellinus Deorum Statuum Cultum, from book 22 here. And you can see here that they found a very obscure, almost Roman emperor, for the artwork here, which is Titus Caesar, who was supposed to be Hadrian's successor, but died prematurely. So it's interesting that they found and kind of reclaimed an obscure proto-emperor here, but they also brought him a bit to life by making his eyes a bit more lifelike. Okay, and you can also, and this goes into Madeleine's talk, right, using the Lord Argentoratum and all these sort of military imagery that is quite anachronistic. They wouldn't have been using gladiuses at that point either, right, in order to invoke kind of familiar Roman military themes. And also, Leon told me that he had quite a reading list to consult of sources. Not just the primary sources from Julian, Madeleine, and of course Ammianus was his main account, but of course he was also being given Vidal, Murdoch, and he even read our dear and late colleague's work, Raphael Ferriori's School by Vegas related to Antioch. I found very interesting. Okay. So I'm not going to get too much into the lyrics here, but one of the main songs is about, in fact, the start of the album really is about the Battle of Argentoratum, Strasbourg, 357, Julian's greatest military victory against the Alemanni. And if you look at the lyrics here, Julian is very much, in the heat of bloodlust, right? He's embodying Mars, the irrational war god here. And this is not something you tend to see in sources on Julian. However, he is interpreting Ammianus' account of the battle, where Julian is in the thick of the battle, exhorting his soldiers, right, to fight for the sake of Rome, right? And you can see the band here itself, likes to identify as Roman soldiers here. This is sort of, I think they're influenced a lot by HBO's Rome and sort of how they represent themselves. You can even see here that in the video for the song on the Battle of Argentoratum, right? They do the Roman military salute, which is again not something that is really historical, but they probably got it from HBO's Rome and other popular media. Of course, it seems that Leon, probably around the time this album, got a tattoo. He has an SPQR with an eagle tattoo. Again, often thought of as something that Roman soldiers tattoo on their arms, right? The music video for Argentoratum also features what Leon told me is an interpretation of the Taurobolium, right? The bull sacrifice made in the blood of the bull, right? As sort of a quintessential pagan rite that is so distasteful to Christian sensibilities, right? And so the album is essentially, the music video ends with Leon essentially being baptized in blood, as it were, right? In order to be christened, the proper Roman emperor here. And then we see that in the next song, This Day with Pride, which is simply representing his acclamation in Paris, where, interestingly, he's undergoing the Taurobolium just as his soldiers outside the gates of the palace in Lutetia are calling him to be emperor here, which I find very interesting. And also there's a lot more I can say here. So for instance, he quotes in the next song, Live to Fight, he's actually addressing his troops as they are about to march against Constantius, and he says, by purple death and seized in fate supreme, okay, which is the quote from Homer that is featured in Ammianus that Julian was said to mutter under his breath as when Constantius led him into the palace when he made Caesar. Here, instead, he's saying the quote way in front of his soldiers as part of the exhortation. I think the point here is that this is a Julian that very much is embracing his mortality and his fate, right? And his humanity, okay, which I find refreshing. Okay. Also, there is, an interpretation of Julian's hymn to King Helios, which I find very interesting. This is a very egalitarian Julian here, who is not really emphasizing his superiority or his divinity or his role as emperor. Instead, the only king he really acknowledges is the god Helios, right? And whereas in the previous song, he acknowledged the torque that the soldiers put on his head, it's really the only time he mentions the crown, right? Is Helios' crown here. Okay, and I'll just skip ahead here so we need to wrap up. Where am I? Yeah, we really need to wrap up, sorry. Right. So I'll just go to the conclusion here. So again, this is an instance of classical perception that I think shows the importance of looking at this kind of material, however perhaps historically inaccurate it is, because it is for other purposes. And I think it is important to look at perspectives outside academia, right? By people who are not so privileged to take part in our project, don't have access to this kind of sources. Okay, they are a barometer telling us sort of how is historical knowledge used and disseminated, outside academia. What kind of sources do they have access to, right? What are people outside of academia reading, okay, that we run? And of course, this presents lots of opportunities for public engagement as well as engaging with students, right? I can say a lot of things about how we can incorporate popular music in the classroom to bring this stuff to life. And of course, reception goes both ways. We're not just studying, hey, how these artists are interpreting sources, but also how looking at these, these outside of academia receptions can help us think about the material we ourselves study, right? And and I'll end on this, okay? What Percival is doing here, and I'm happy to talk more about this later. But the Julian that Percival seems to be looking at is the Julian that I myself see actually come through with a lot of Julian's own writings, where he's presenting himself much more as down to earth, as a human, as a fellow soldier, though they are also incorporating some more humanizing elements here, right, that I think that are part of, the influence of Argentine folk music here, right? One embraces mortality, and also Julian representing himself as more egalitarian. His true king is Helios. He's a slave of Helios, as he says in Helios. And finally, I didn't really get this into the last song here, where it was called Kisti Galilae, right? Thou hast conquered all the land. But as opposed to kind of the deathbed speech in Ammianus, where he is very much happy that his soul will be descendant of gods, he's much more concerned with the cause, with the cause of his fellow men, of his religious cause, and that he predicts that in the future there will be a world, in which religious pluralism, paganism will again have freedom and be respected. And that's essentially what Leon told me is sort of the interpretation of this sort of pathetic moment at the end of the album, where he says that when the pagan empire remembers my name, I will answer. And so it ends on a note of optimism, despite the sadness of that moment. And so I'll end there. Sorry for going a bit over time, but I hope you enjoyed that.